The winter of 1873 came down hard on the mountains near the Wyoming-Montana border, bringing with it the kind of cold that seeped through wool and leather, straight into a body's bones. The wind howled through the pines like a wounded animal, carrying sheets of snow that cut at exposed skin like tiny knives. It was weather fit for neither man nor beast. Yet Clara Whitmore found herself stumbling through it with nothing but a thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders and a half-dead horse trailing behind her. The town of Copper Creek had cast her out that morning. They'd waited just long enough after her boy's burial, 2 days, to be precise, before the good Christian women came knocking. Mrs. Henderson led the pack, her pinched face twisted with righteous fury beneath her proper bonnet. "We've tolerated your presence long enough, Clara Whitmore," she'd declared from Clara's doorstep, flanked by a dozen other townswomen. "But with your boy gone, there's no reason for decent folk to endure your stain upon our community any longer." Clara had stood there, still in her mourning dress, still feeling the weight of dirt on her hands from filling in her son's grave. Little Thomas, barely 6 years old, taken by the lung fever that had swept through town. She'd begged the doctor to come, had offered him everything she owned. But he'd refused. "Best the boy goes to the Lord clean," he'd said, considering his mother's sins. The women had given her an hour to gather her belongings, an hour to pack up 6 years of life, 6 years of trying to build something respectable despite the whispers that followed her everywhere. They watched as she loaded her few possessions onto her old mare, the same horse her late husband had ridden to war and never ridden back. They watched as she wrapped Thomas's wooden soldiers in a piece of calico, her hands shaking not from cold but from grief so fresh it still bled. "Don't come back, Mrs. Henderson had called after her. "We've had enough of your Indian-loving ways bringing curse upon curse to our town." That had been 8 hours ago. 8 hours of trudging through deepening snow, following what might have been a trail or might have been her imagination. The storm had rolled in fast from the north, turning day into premature dusk. Clara's feet had gone numb hours ago, and she'd stopped feeling her fingers around the same time. The mare wheezed with each step, ice forming around her nostrils. Clara knew she was going to die. The thought came to her with surprising calm. She'd die out here in the wilderness, and come spring, someone might find her bones picked clean by wolves and ravens. It seemed fitting. In a way, she'd been dead to decent society for years already. Her body was just catching up to what her reputation had already accomplished. She thought of Thomas, of his small body in the cold ground. Perhaps it was better this way. At least now she could join him, could hold him again in whatever came after. The wind shrieked louder, and Clara pulled the blanket tighter, though it did little good. Ice had formed in her dark hair, pulling it down in frozen clumps. That's when she saw it, a flicker of light through the driving snow. At first, she thought it was death coming for her, some angel's lantern guiding her to the other side. But as she stumbled closer, the mare reluctantly following, the light resolved itself into something more earthly, a window, glowing warm and yellow against the storm, a cabin, built sturdy from thick logs, tucked into a grove of pines that offered some shelter from the worst of the wind. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, quickly snatched away by the gale. Clara stood there for a long moment, swaying on her feet, wondering if she was seeing things, but the mare nickered softly, scenting the presence of other horses, and Clara knew it was real. She approached the door on legs that barely functioned, each step an act of pure will. Her first knock was so weak she doubted anyone inside could hear it over the storm. She tried again, harder this time, using the last of her strength to pound on the solid wood. The door opened so suddenly she nearly fell forward. Heat rushed out, along with the smell of wood smoke and cooking meat, and filling the doorway was the largest man Clara had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and solid as the mountains themselves. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, dark with streaks of premature gray. His hair was long, tied back with a leather cord, and his clothes were a mix of buckskin and wool, practical and well-worn. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray as winter sky, cold and assessing, taking in her bedraggled state in one swift glance. "Please," Clara managed through chattering teeth. I can pay." Her numb fingers fumbled at the small pouch hanging from her belt. Inside were the last of her valuables, her mother's silver locket, her wedding ring, a pair of small pearl earrings that had been a gift from her husband before the war. She'd hidden them from the townswomen, knowing she might need them for just such an emergency. She pulled out the locket, holding it toward him with a trembling hand. The silver caught the lamplight from inside, winking like a tiny star. The man's eyes moved from her face to the locket, then back again. His expression didn't change. If anything, it grew harder. "I don't take silver," he said, his voice rough as gravel, like he didn't use it much, especially not from women half frozen to death. Clara swayed, her vision starting to blur at the edges. "Please, I have nowhere else." The man moved then, quick despite his size, catching her arm before she could fall. His hand was warm, even through her wet sleeve, steadying her with surprising gentleness. "Can you make it inside on your own? Or do I need to carry you?" Pride flared weakly in Clara's chest. She'd been carrying herself and her burdens for too long to be carried now. "I can walk." He stepped back, holding the door wide. Clara made it 3 steps into the blessed warmth before her legs gave out entirely. She heard the man curse, a low, muttered sound, and then strong arms were lifting her, carrying her to a chair by the fireplace. "Stay put," he ordered, then disappeared back out into the storm. Clara wanted to protest, to explain about her horse, but the heat was seeping into her frozen limbs, bringing with it a pain so intense she could only sit there and shake. She heard him outside, heard her mare's grateful whinny, and knew he was seeing to the animal. A practical man. Then, good. Practical men were predictable, safe in their way. He returned, bringing with him a gust of cold air and snow. After barring the door against the storm, he moved to a shelf along one wall, pulling down a bottle and 2 cups. He poured amber liquid into both, then pressed one into Clara's hands. "Drink. It'll help with the shaking." The whiskey burned going down, but it spread warmth through her chest. Clara took another sip, then another, while the man settled into a chair across from her. He didn't drink from his own cup, just watched her with those gray eyes that seemed to see too much. "You running from something or someone?" he asked finally. "Both. Neither." Clara's voice came out hoarse. "The town. They made me leave. Said I brought curses with me. My boy." She couldn't finish. Something flickered in the man's eyes. Not quite sympathy, but understanding, perhaps. "Towns are full of fools who think they know God's mind. How long were you out in that storm?" "Hours. I don't really know." You're lucky you found this place. Another hour and you'd have been frozen solid." He paused, then added, "Name's Ezekiel Hartwell. Folks that knew me called me Zeke, but that was a long time ago." "Clara Whitmore," she replied automatically, then wondered if she should have given a false name, but what did it matter? If he meant her harm, there was little she could do about it in her current state. "Well, Clara Whitmore, you can stay the night. Storm should blow itself out by morning. Then you can decide where you're headed." I don't know where to go." The admission hurt to make. "I've got no people, no place that'll have me." Zeke studied her for a long moment. "What'd you do that was so terrible?" Clara stared into her cup. The whiskey was almost gone, and with it, some of her defensive walls. "I survived when my husband didn't come back from the war. I took help where I could find it. The man who helped me, he wasn't white." She waited for the familiar look of disgust, the righteous anger. Instead, Zeke just nodded slowly. Practical woman. Then, nothing wrong with choosing life over some fool notion of propriety. Clara looked up, startled. It was the first time in years anyone had suggested her choice had been anything other than shameful. "You can stay longer than just tonight." Zeke continued, standing and moving to tend the fire. "This storm's just the first of many. Winter's settling in hard. You try to travel in this, you'll end up dead for certain. I've got space, and I could use another pair of hands around here. I couldn't. I have nothing to pay you with." He turned from the fire, and for the first time, she saw something that might have been amusement in his eyes. "Told you, I don't take silver." "You cook?" "Yes." "Clean?" "Of course." "Can you skin a rabbit?" Clara nodded. "Then you can earn your keep. This place hasn't seen a woman's touch in, well, longer than I care to think about. You stay out of my way, do your share, and we'll get along fine." It was more than she'd dared hope for. And when spring comes, you can decide what you want to do. But that's months away. No sense borrowing trouble from tomorrow when today's got plenty of its own. He showed her to a small room at the back of the cabin. It was sparse, just a narrow bed with a straw mattress, a wooden chest, and a few pegs on the wall for clothes, but it was clean and dry. And after weeks of knowing she and Thomas would be turned out eventually, it felt like a palace. "There's dry clothes in the chest," Zeke said from the doorway. "They'll be too big, but they're warm. Come morning, we'll see about getting your things dried out proper." He started to leave, then paused. "That boy you mentioned, how old?" "6. The word came out sharp with pain. "The lung fever took him 4 days ago." Zeke nodded once, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry for your loss." Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with her grief and exhaustion. She changed into the dry clothes, men's clothes that smelled of cedar and wood smoke, and crawled into the bed. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, she was warm and safe, at least for now, as sleep finally claimed her. Clara thought she heard something through the wall, the low rumble of Zeke's voice, as if he were talking to someone, but there was no one else here, and she was too tired to wonder about it. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight, she was alive, and for now, that was enough. Clara woke to gray light filtering through the small window and the sound of an axe striking wood. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed was wrong, the air smelled different, and there was no small warm body curled against her side. Then memory crashed over her like a cold wave. Thomas was gone. The town had cast her out. She was in a stranger's cabin, dependent on his charity. She dressed quickly in her own clothes, now dry but still bearing the salt marks of yesterday's tears and sweat. Her boots were stiff but wearable. When she emerged from the small room, the main cabin was empty, but a pot of coffee sat warming on the stove, and a plate of biscuits waited on the table, covered with a clean cloth. Through the window, she could see Zeke splitting wood in the yard. He'd cleared a path through the snow to the woodshed and worked with steady, economical movements. Each swing of the axe was precise, splitting logs cleanly in two. He'd shed his coat despite the cold, working in just his shirt and vest, and Clara could see the way his muscles moved beneath the fabric, the controlled power in every motion. She turned away, busying herself with exploring the cabin in daylight. It was larger than she'd realized the night before, well-built and sturdy, but it was undeniably a man's space, functional to the point of bareness. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, no touches of comfort beyond the strictly necessary. The dishes were clean but mismatched, the furniture solid but graceless. Dust gathered in corners, and cobwebs decorated the higher reaches of the walls. Clara found a broom and set to work. It was easier than thinking, easier than remembering. She swept and dusted, reorganized the shelves, cleaned the already clean dishes. When Zeke came in an hour later, arms full of split wood, he stopped in the doorway, taking in the changes with those watchful gray eyes. "You don't waste time," he observed, stacking the wood by the fireplace. "Idle hands are the devil's tools," Clara replied automatically, then winced at hearing the town's pious phrases coming from her own mouth. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Zeke's face. "Never found the devil needed much help from idle hands. Seems to do fine with the busy ones, too." He poured himself coffee and sat at the table, gesturing for her to join him. Clara sat carefully, aware of every movement, every sound in the quiet cabin. Storms passed, but another one's coming. Zeke said, "Probably hit tomorrow night. We'll need to be ready." "What needs doing?" "Check the animals, secure anything that might blow away, bring in extra wood." "You up for helping?" Clara nodded. "I'm stronger than I look." "Never doubted it. Woman who survived what you have wouldn't be weak." They worked through the morning in relative silence. Zeke showed her around the property, the small barn where 3 horses stayed warm, the smokehouse with its stores of preserved meat, the root cellar dug into the hillside. Everything was well maintained, organized with military precision. Clara found herself wondering what kind of man chose such isolation, what had driven him to these lonely mountains. As she helped him check the barn's roof for loose boards, she caught sight of his back when he reached for a high beam. His shirt pulled tight, revealing the outline of scars beneath. Long, parallel marks that spoke of violence survived. "Watch that ladder," Zeke said without turning around. "Third rung's loose." Clara realized she'd been staring and quickly looked away, heat rising in her cheeks despite the cold. They ate lunch in silence, venison stew that Zeke had apparently started before dawn. It was surprisingly good, seasoned with herbs Clara couldn't identify. She wondered where he'd learned to cook like this, but didn't ask. The unspoken rule seemed to be that questions were unwelcome, that they would exist in this space together without prying into each other's wounds. That afternoon, while Zeke tended to something in the barn, Clara explored more of the cabin. In a trunk beneath the window, she found books, Shakespeare, Milton, books on philosophy and history. Well read, their pages soft with handling. On a shelf, half hidden behind preserved goods, she discovered a small carved wooden horse, made with obvious skill and care, a child's toy, though no child lived here now. "That's not yours to touch." Clara spun around. Zeke stood in the doorway, his expression hard as granite. She hadn't heard him come in. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Leave it be." His voice was flat, brooking no argument. He crossed to the shelf and adjusted a jar, hiding the toy from view again. "Some things are private. You do well to remember that." Clara nodded, shame burning in her throat. "Of course, I apologize." The tension in the cabin was palpable for the rest of the day. They ate dinner in silence, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the wind beginning to pick up outside. Clara cleaned up, aware of Zeke's eyes on her, watching like a hawk watches a mouse. When she couldn't stand it anymore, she spoke. "I lost my boy 4 days ago. I understand about private pain." Zeke looked up from the knife he was sharpening. "Do you?" His name was Thomas. He liked toy soldiers and maple candy and catching frogs in the creek. He was afraid of thunder but pretended he wasn't. Her voice broke. "He asked for water at the end, and I gave it to him even though the doctors said not to. I couldn't let him die thirsty." The silence stretched between them. Then Zeke set down his knife. "My sister made that horse," he said quietly. "She was 12, had clever hands, could carve anything. Indians took her in a raid while I was away. By the time I tracked them down—" He shrugged, the gesture saying everything his words didn't. "The horse is all I have left of her." "I'm sorry. Long time ago now. 15 years, maybe more. Time blurs things." He picked up the knife again. "But some things you don't forget. Some things you don't forgive." Clara understood. Oh, how she understood. "The town blamed me for Thomas dying. Said it was punishment for my sins. As if God would kill a child to punish his mother." "God." Zeke said the word like it tasted bitter. "If there is one, he's got a cruel sense of humor." They lapsed into silence again. But it was different now, less sharp, more like a shared weight. When Clara finally rose to go to bed, Zeke spoke again. "You can clean what you like. Just leave that shelf alone." "I will." She paused at the door to her room. "Mr. Hartwell, Zeke, thank you for letting me stay." He waved her thanks away. "Just remember what I said. Stay out of my way. We'll get along fine." But as Clara lay in the narrow bed, listening to the wind grow stronger, she heard him moving around the main room, heard the trunk open, the rustle of pages. He was reading, she realized. This hard, scarred man who'd lost a sister to violence spent his evenings with books. She thought of her own losses, her husband, her son, her place in the world. Thought of the scars she'd glimpsed on Zeke's back, the pain in his eyes when he'd talked about his sister. They were both walking wounded, she realized, taking shelter in this cabin like animals denning up for winter. The next morning brought the promised storm. Clara woke to howling wind and snow beating against the window. The cabin creaked but held firm, built to withstand worse than this. She found Zeke already up, feeding the fire. "We'll be stuck inside today," he said by way of greeting. "Hope you don't mind close quarters." Clara almost laughed at that. After years of being treated like a leper in town, having just one person to avoid was almost a luxury. "I'll manage." They developed a rhythm as the day wore on. Clara mended clothes while Zeke worked on repairing tack. They moved around each other carefully, like dancers who hadn't yet learned the steps. Once, reaching for the coffee pot at the same time, their hands touched. Both pulled back as if burned. "Sorry," Clara murmured. "No harm done." But Zeke moved to the far side of the room, putting the table between them. That night, as the storm raged worse than before, Clara woke to the sound of voices. She lay still, listening. It was Zeke, talking in his sleep. Most of the words were unintelligible, but she caught names. May, his sister presumably, and others, commands. Maybe, like he was back in whatever war had scarred him. Then, clear as day, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Clara pulled her blanket up to her chin, trying not to listen, but the walls were thin, and Zeke's nightmares were loud. She heard him thrashing, heard something fall and break. Without thinking, she rose and padded to his door. "Zeke?" She knocked softly. "Zeke, wake up!" The thrashing stopped. She heard harsh breathing, then footsteps. The door opened a crack, and Zeke peered out. His face sheened with sweat despite the cold. "What?" The word was harsh, defensive. "You were having a nightmare." I thought, "I'm fine." He started to close the door, then paused. "Did I wake you?" "The storm woke me." Clara lied. "But I heard, are you all right?" He laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Haven't been all right in years, Mrs. Whitmore. But I manage. We all manage," Clara said softly, "until we don't." They stood there in the darkness, the storm howling around them. Two damaged people recognizing something in each other. Then Zeke stepped back. "Go back to bed. Morning comes early, storm or no storm." Clara returned to her room, but sleep eluded her. She thought about the man on the other side of the wall, fighting battles in his sleep that he couldn't win. Thought about her own dreams of Thomas, how she woke reaching for a child who wasn't there. Perhaps that's what had brought her here, to this isolated cabin with its taciturn owner. Not just the storm or the town's cruelty, but some deeper current that brought the broken together. They could exist here, she and Zeke, without pretense or judgment. Two wounded souls keeping each other company through the long winter, asking nothing more than survival. As dawn broke gray and subdued through the continuing storm, Clara rose and started coffee. When Zeke emerged, she handed him a cup without comment. He took it, their fingers brushing briefly. And this time neither pulled away quite so quickly. "Storm might last another day," he said. "Then we'd best settle in." Clara replied, and they did, finding in the forced proximity not comfort exactly, but something like acceptance. They were what they were, scarred, loss-marked, cast out, but they were also alive, and in the middle of a killing winter. That counted for something. Clara found herself thinking less about what she'd lost and more about what strange sanctuary she'd found. Not peace, that was too much to hope for, but a place where her sins were just history, where her grief was met with understanding rather than judgment, where a man could keep his sister's carved horse on a shelf and speak her name without shame. It wasn't much, but after everything, it was enough. The weeks turned slowly, marked by storms that came and went, leaving fresh blankets of snow across the mountain. Clara had fallen into the rhythm of the isolated cabin life. Up before dawn to start the fire and coffee, days spent in necessary work, evenings by the fireplace with the comfortable silence that had developed between her and Zeke. It was on a clear morning in early March that she first accompanied him on his trap line. The sun reflected blindingly off the snow, and the air was so cold it hurt to breathe. But Clara had insisted she could help. "You need to learn the land," Zeke had said simply when he'd invited her. "Case something happens to me, you'll need to know where things are." The casual mention of his mortality had sent an unexpected chill through Clara, but she'd only nodded and bundled up in the spare coat he'd provided. They moved through the forest on snowshoes, Zeke leading with the confident stride of a man who knew every tree and stone. Clara struggled at first, the awkward gait required by the snowshoes making her stumble, but she was determined not to slow him down. "Here," Zeke said, stopping at the first trap. "Watch how I do this." He showed her how to check the trap, how to reset it, how to read the signs in the snow that told of animal passage. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but he was patient in his teaching, repeating steps when she didn't understand. "You trapped before the war?" Clara asked as they moved to the next location. "During," Zeke replied shortly. "Scouts had to know how to live off the land." "Which side?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Zeke glanced back at her, his expression unreadable above his scarf. "Does it matter?" "No," Clara said, and found she meant it. "Not anymore." They worked in companionable silence after that, checking each trap along the line. Most were empty, but they found 2 rabbits, which Zeke efficiently dispatched and tied to his pack. "Spring's coming," he said, examining tracks near one of the traps. "Animals are starting to move more. Soon the snow will melt and the passes will clear." Clara heard what he didn't say, that when the passes cleared, she could leave if she chose. The thought sat uneasily in her chest. Where would she go? What town would have her? But more than that, she realized with a small shock, was that she wasn't sure she wanted to leave. As they turned back toward the cabin, Clara spotted movement through the trees. "Zeke," she whispered, pointing. He turned, following her gaze, then relaxed. "Just deer. 3 does. Looks like—" They watched the animals pick their delicate way through the snow, graceful despite the deep drifts. One raised her head, seeming to look directly at Clara, before bounding away with the others. "Beautiful," Clara murmured. "That they are." Zeke's voice was softer than usual. "This land's hard, but it's got its moments." On the way back, Clara's snowshoe caught on a buried branch, sending her sprawling into a drift. She came up sputtering, covered in snow, expecting annoyance from Zeke. Instead, she heard something she'd never heard before, his laughter. Not the bitter sound from weeks ago, but genuine amusement. "You look like a snow spirit," he said, reaching down to help her up. "A clumsy one," Clara replied, taking his hand. He pulled her to her feet, and for a moment they stood close, her hand still in his. Clara could see the lines around his eyes, the way the cold had reddened his cheeks above his beard. His gray eyes were warmer than she'd ever seen them. Then he stepped back, dropping her hand. "Best keep moving. Don't want to be out here when the temperature drops." That evening, as Clara prepared the rabbits for stew, she was aware of Zeke watching her from his chair by the fire. She'd grown used to his silent observation, but tonight felt different somehow. "You did well today," he said suddenly. Clara looked up, surprised. Compliments from Zeke were rarer than summer snow. "Thank you. Most women wouldn't have lasted an hour out there." "I'm not most women." The words came out sharper than she intended. "No," Zeke agreed quietly. "You're not." After dinner, Clara found herself restless. The cabin felt too small, too warm. She stepped out onto the porch, wrapping her shawl tight against the cold. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. She heard the door open behind her, felt Zeke's presence before he spoke. "Full moon tomorrow," he said, moving to stand beside her. "Makes the night almost bright as day. Thomas loved full moons," Clara said softly. "Called them God's nightlight." She felt rather than saw Zeke shift closer, not touching, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. "Tell me about him." It was the first time he'd asked. Clara found the words coming easier than expected. She told him about Thomas's first steps, his fear of chickens, the way he'd sung to himself when he thought no one was listening. She talked until her throat hurt and her eyes burned with unshed tears. "He sounds like he was a fine boy," Zeke said when she finished. "He was everything good in this world." Clara whispered, "And now he's gone. The good ones always seem to go first." There was old pain in Zeke's voice. May was like that, pure sunshine, even when things were hard. Used to sing while she worked, hymns mostly. Beautiful voice. They stood in silence, sharing their ghosts. Then Zeke did something unexpected. He reached over and touched Clara's hand where it rested on the porch rail. Just a brief contact, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Gets easier," he said. "Never goes away, but it gets easier to carry." Clara turned her hand palm up, catching his fingers before he could pull away. They stood like that, barely touching, while the stars wheeled overhead and their breath made clouds in the frigid air. "I should go in," Clara finally said, though she made no move to do so. "Should you?" There was something in his voice she hadn't heard before. When she looked up at him, his eyes were intent on her face, searching for something. "Zeke," he pulled his hand away, stepping back. "You're right, it's late." But as Clara lay in her narrow bed, she could still feel the warmth of his fingers against hers. Something had shifted between them, subtle as the seasons change, but just as inevitable. The next morning brought a late storm, driving them both inside. Clara was mending one of Zeke's shirts when she noticed him favoring his left shoulder. "You're hurt," she said. "It's nothing. Old wound acts up when the weather changes. Let me see." "I said it's nothing." But Clara had learned stubbornness in her years of widowhood. "You've been favoring it for 2 days. Let me help." They engaged in a brief staring contest before Zeke finally sighed and began unbuttoning his shirt. "Stubborn woman. Stubborn man," Clara countered, when he pulled the shirt off his shoulder. Clara had to bite back a gasp. The scars she'd glimpsed before were worse than she'd imagined. Long, ragged marks that crisscrossed his back and shoulder. "What did this?" she asked, her fingers hovering over the damaged skin. "Sioux warrior with a very sharp knife and a lot of anger." Zeke's voice was matter-of-fact. "Would have killed me if my sergeant hadn't shot him. As it was, I nearly bled out." Clara fetched her salve, the one she'd used on Thomas's scraped knees and cut fingers. As she worked it gently into the scarred tissue, she felt Zeke gradually relax under her hands. "Why did you stay out here?" she asked quietly. "After the war? After everything?" "Where else would I go?" Zeke replied. "Back east to civilization? To people who'd look at me and see just another broken soldier? No. Out here, the mountains don't care what you've done or what was done to you. They just care if you're strong enough to survive. And are you strong enough?" He turned to look at her, and their faces were suddenly very close. "I was. Then you showed up at my door. I'm sorry." "No." He caught her hand where it rested on his shoulder. "That's not what I meant. I mean, I'd gotten too good at being alone. Forgotten there was any other way to be." Clara's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "And now?" Instead of answering, Zeke lifted his free hand to her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. The touch was feather-light, almost questioning. Clara leaned into it, her eyes fluttering closed. "Clara," her name was rough on his lips. "We shouldn't." She opened her eyes. "Why?" "You're under my protection. It wouldn't be right. I'm not some innocent girl. Zeke, I'm a grown woman who's buried a husband and a child. I know my own mind." He searched her face, looking for doubt, for fear, Finding none, he leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "If we do this, things change," he warned. Things have already changed. For a long moment, they breathed the same air, balanced on the edge of something irreversible. Then Zeke pulled back, his hand dropping from her face. "Not like this," he said roughly. "Not because we're lonely and scared and got no one else." The rejection stung, but Clara understood. They were both too damaged to mistake proximity for genuine feeling, too aware of their own wounds to risk creating new ones. She finished tending his shoulder in silence, then retreated to her room. But as she lay there listening to the storm, she knew Zeke was right. Things had already changed. The careful distance they'd maintained was eroding like snow in spring sun. Soon, they'd have to decide what came next. Through the wall, she heard Zeke moving around, restless as a caged wolf. Heard him pick up his book, set it down again. Finally, his footsteps approached her door. He stood there. She could see the shadow of his feet in the gap beneath, but didn't knock. After a long moment, the footsteps retreated. Clara pressed her face into her pillow, torn between relief and disappointment. They were dancing around something powerful and dangerous, something that could either save them or destroy what fragile peace they'd found. Outside, the storm raged on, but it was nothing compared to the tempest building within the walls of the small cabin. Spring was coming, and with it, choices that would have to be made. But for now, they existed in this liminal space, neither together nor apart, bound by loss and loneliness and the faint, frightening possibility of something more. The wolf came at dawn, a gray shadow against the melting snow. Clara saw it first from the kitchen window, circling the chicken coop with predatory patience. The few hens Zeke kept were squawking in terror, pressing themselves against the far wall of their enclosure. "Zeke," she called quietly, not wanting to startle the animal into attacking. He was beside her in seconds, rifle already in hand. Through the window, they watched the wolf pace, its ribs showing through patchy fur. "Starving," Zeke murmured. "Late winter's hard on them, too. The chickens, I know." He was already moving toward the door. "Stay inside." But Clara had learned too much independence to cower indoors. She followed him out, grabbing the shotgun from beside the door. Zeke glanced back, frowning, but said nothing. The wolf turned at their appearance, lips pulling back from yellowed fangs. It was a pitiful creature up close, desperation evident in every line of its body. But desperate animals were the most dangerous. Zeke raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel. The wolf crouched, preparing to spring. Clara held her breath, waiting for the shot. It never came. Instead, the wolf launched itself, not at the chickens, but at Clara. She'd stepped too far from the door, too far from Zeke's protection. Time slowed as the animal sailed through the air, jaws wide. The gunshot was deafening. The wolf twisted mid-leap, Zeke's bullet catching it in the shoulder. It hit Clara anyway, knocking her backwards into the mud and slush. Fangs snapped inches from her throat before Zeke was there, hauling the wounded animal off her, finishing it with his hunting knife in one swift motion. "Clara!" He dropped beside her, hands running over her arms, her sides, checking for wounds. "Did it bite you? Clara, answer me. I'm all right." She was shaking, adrenaline making her voice unsteady. "Just scared." Zeke pulled her against him, crushing her to his chest. She could feel his heart hammering, his breath harsh in her ear. "Damn foolish woman, I told you to stay inside. Since when do I do what I'm told?" The joke fell flat, her voice too shaky to carry humor. He pulled back enough to see her face, his hands framing her cheeks. "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't. You saved me." Something wild flickered in his gray eyes. Before Clara could identify it, he was kissing her, fierce and desperate. It was nothing like the gentle touch she might have imagined in her weaker moments. This was raw need, fear transformed into passion. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, tasting coffee and desperation on his lips. For a moment, the world narrowed to just this, the heat of his mouth, the solid strength of his body, the way her blood sang in response. Then Zeke wrenched himself away, breathing hard. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "Don't!" Clara caught his hand before he could retreat entirely. "Don't apologize, not for that." They stared at each other, both mud-splattered and shaken. The dead wolf lay beside them, its blood seeping into the slush. Reality reasserted itself slowly. I should take care of that," Zeke said, gesturing to the carcass. "Yes." Clara released his hand reluctantly. "I'll see to the chickens." They worked in silence, but the air between them crackled with unspoken words. Every accidental touch as they moved around each other sent sparks through Clara's body. She caught Zeke watching her, his expression unguarded for once, showing a hunger that matched her own. That evening, as they sat by the fire, the tension was unbearable. Clara tried to focus on her mending, but her hands trembled, making the stitches crooked. Zeke pretended to read, but she hadn't seen him turn a page in 20 minutes. Finally, he set the book aside. "About this morning." "Which part?" Clara asked. "The wolf attack or what came after?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You're not going to make this easy, are you?" "When have I ever made anything easy?" He laughed, that rare, genuine sound she'd come to treasure. "Fair point." The laughter faded, replaced by something more serious. "Clara, I'm not good at this." "At what?" "At wanting things, at feeling." He gestured helplessly. "I've been alone a long time. By choice. It was simpler that way. Cleaner." Clara set aside her mending. "And now?" "Now there's you." The words seemed pulled from him. "Making me coffee in the morning, singing while you work, even though you think I can't hear, looking at me like I'm not just some scarred-up hermit." "You're not. I am." He cut her off. "I am scarred, and I have been a hermit. I've done things. Clara, terrible things. In the war. After. Things that would make you look at me different if you knew." Clara was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "We've all done things to survive. I lived with a Cheyenne man for 2 years after my husband died. Shared his bed, bore his child, a child that died before its 2nd birthday, before Thomas was born. The town never knew about that baby, but they knew enough. They called me terrible names, treated Thomas like he was tainted by association. But I survived. We do what we must." Zeke stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "You had a child with a man who was kind to me when the rest of the world wasn't." "Yes." She met his gaze steadily. "Does that change how you see me?" "No." The answer came immediately. "Makes me understand you better. Maybe we're both outsiders. Both got histories that don't fit in civilized company." They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Then Zeke rose, moving to sit beside her on the small bench, close enough that she could feel his warmth, smell the wood smoke and leather scent of him. "I'm no good at gentle," he said quietly. "Don't know how to court a woman proper. Don't have pretty words or promises to offer. I don't need pretty words." Clara turned to face him. "I've had pretty words. They didn't keep me warm or fed or safe. You have?" He reached out, fingers tangling in her dark hair, loosening it from its pins. "This morning, when I thought that wolf might, I realized something." "What?" "That I'd rather face a dozen wolves than lose you." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Clara leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "Then don't lose me." This time when he kissed her, it was slower, deeper. Not the desperate collision of the morning, but something deliberate, exploring. Clara melted into it, her hands finding the broad planes of his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady under her palms. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Zeke rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure? Because if we do this, I won't be able to let you go come spring. I'm too selfish for that." "I'm sure," Clara whispered. "I've been sure for weeks now." He stood, pulling her up with him, leading her not to her small room, but to his. The bed was larger, the quilt worn but clean. Moonlight spilled through the window, painting everything in silver. They came together with a hunger born of loneliness and need, of too many nights spent wondering what if. Zeke's hands were calloused but gentle, mapping the curves of her body with reverent attention. Clara traced the scars on his back, pressing kisses to each mark of survival. When he rose above her, his face serious in the moonlight, he asked one more time, "Clara?" She pulled him down for a kiss, pouring all her answer into the touch of lips and tongue and breath shared. They moved together, finding a rhythm as old as the mountains around them, chasing away the cold and the ghosts and the loneliness that had defined them for so long. Later, as they lay entwined, Clara's head on Zeke's chest, he spoke into the darkness. It's been years since I've been with anyone." "How many years?" "Since before May died. There was a girl in town, wanted to marry me, but after—" He trailed off. Clara understood. Tragedy had a way of making intimacy impossible, of building walls too high to climb. Until now. "No one since my Cheyenne man," she admitted. "The town made sure of that. No decent man would have me, and I wouldn't have any other kind." Zeke's arm tightened around her. "Their loss." They dozed, waking to touch and taste and explore again. By dawn, Clara felt fundamentally changed, as if some frozen part of her had finally thawed. When she tried to slip back to her own room, habit more than desire, Zeke caught her wrist. "Stay." One word, but it held everything. "Stay here. Stay with me. Stay always." She stayed. The next days passed in a blur of new intimacy. They worked side by side as always. But now there were stolen kisses in the barn, lingering touches as they passed in the small cabin. At night, they came together with increasing passion, learning each other's bodies, mapping pleasure and desire. But even in their newfound happiness, reality intruded. Zeke taught Clara to shoot properly, to handle both rifle and revolver with deadly accuracy. "Why now?" she asked after a particularly intense lesson. His jaw tightened. "Spring's coming, snow's melting. People will be able to travel soon." Clara understood. Their isolation, their protection, was ending. The world would intrude again, and they needed to be ready. One night, as they sat watching the fire, Zeke spoke suddenly. "I never told you her name. The Cheyenne woman I was with. What was she called?" "Singing Bird. Her English name. Anyway, she had a beautiful voice. Like your sister." Zeke nodded slowly. "And she was good to you?" "Very good. Taught me things. How to tan hides, make pemmican, read weather signs, how to survive." Clara paused. "The town didn't understand. They saw only the color of his skin, not the kindness of his heart." "I killed Cheyenne," Zeke said quietly. "In the war. Women and children, too, in raids. Following orders, they said. But orders don't wash blood off your hands." Clara took his hand, feeling the calluses and scars. "We've all got blood on our hands, one way or another. Question is what we do after." "And what do we do after?" She brought his hand to her lips, kissing each scarred knuckle. "We live. We choose to be better. We take what happiness we can find." He pulled her into his lap, burying his face in her hair. "I don't deserve you." "Deserving's got nothing to do with it," Clara said. "We found each other. That's what matters." They made love slowly that night, with a tenderness that brought tears to Clara's eyes. In the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, they were just two souls who'd found shelter from the storm. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight they had this warmth, connection, the precious gift of not being alone. As sleep claimed them, Clara thought she heard wolves howling in the distance. But here, in Zeke's arms, she felt no fear. They'd faced one wolf already and survived. Whatever came next, they'd face together. The spring was coming, and with it, change. But for now, in this moment, they had each other, and that was enough. More than enough, it was everything. The late March blizzard struck without warning, trapping them inside for 3 days. Outside, the wind screamed like a living thing. piling snow against the windows until the cabin felt like a cave, but inside, warmed by the fire and each other. Clara had never felt less confined. They'd moved her few belongings into Zeke's room the week before, a silent acknowledgement of what they'd become to each other. Now, as the storm raged, they lay entwined in the big bed, skin against skin, listening to nature's fury. "Tell me about the war," Clara said quietly, tracing a particularly jagged scar across his ribs. Zeke tensed, but didn't pull away. "Which part?" "Any part. The parts that keep you up at night." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, the words came. He told her about being a scout, about tracking through hostile territory for days without rest, about the ambush that killed half his unit and left him bleeding in a ravine for 2 days before help came, about finding settlements burned, families destroyed, on both sides. "The worst was after," he said, his voice rough. "When the formal fighting stopped but the killing didn't, revenge raids, both ways. I was part of a unit sent to pacify a Sioux camp. They said there were weapons hidden there." Clara waited, her hand still on his chest, feeling his heartbeat quicken. "There weren't any weapons, just families, women, children, old folks. But orders were orders, and—" he swallowed hard. "I tried to stop it. Got this for my trouble." He touched a scar on his shoulder. "Bullet from my own sergeant. Said I was a traitor to my race. You tried to do right. Too little, too late. By the time I recovered, discharged myself out, May was already gone, taken in a revenge raid while I was lying in some field hospital feeling sorry for myself." Clara rose up on one elbow, looking down at his face in the dim light. "You couldn't have known, couldn't have prevented it. Maybe, maybe not, but I've got to live with it either way." He met her eyes. "Just like you've got to live with your boy being gone." She lay back down, pressing close against his side. "We're a pair, aren't we? Walking wounded, the both of us. That we are." His arm came around her, pulling her closer. "But maybe that's why this works. We understand each other's ghosts." They made love slowly, the storm muffling their cries, the world reduced to just their two bodies moving together in ancient rhythm. Afterwards, Clara lay with her head on Zeke's chest, listening to his heartbeat in the wind. "When I was with Singing Bird's people," she said, "they had a saying, that sorrow shared is sorrow halved, but joy shared is joy doubled. Wise people. They were. The town didn't think so, but they were." She paused. "I loved him, you. Not the way I loved my husband, but it was real. He was gentle with me when gentleness was all that kept me from shattering." Zeke's hand stroked through her hair. "Do you miss him?" "Sometimes I miss what we had, the simplicity of it. No past, no future, just survival and small moments of peace." She turned to look at him. "Is that wrong? No more wrong than me missing the clarity of war sometimes, when you knew who the enemy was, what you were supposed to do. This peace, it's harder in some ways." They understood each other. Clara thought both had loved and lost. Both had crossed lines that society said shouldn't be crossed. Both had found ways to survive that others judged harshly. But here, in this bed, in this cabin, none of that mattered. The storm finally broke on the third day, leaving behind a world transformed. Drifts reached halfway up the windows, and the silence after so much wind was almost eerie. They ventured out together, checking on the animals, clearing paths, marveling at the pristine white landscape. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed, watching sunlight dance on the snow. "Deadly beautiful," Zeke corrected, but he was smiling. "This kind of snow can kill the unwary, but yes, beautiful too." They were gathering firewood when Clara felt the change, a cramp low in her belly, familiar and unexpected. She'd thought, with the stress and grief, her monthly courses had been irregular, but this felt different. Stronger. "Clara?" Zeke noticed her pause, saw something in her face. "What's wrong?" Another cramp, sharper this time. "I think—" "Oh." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He dropped the wood and caught her arm. "How long?" "I don't know. I thought it was just, I've been irregular since Thomas—" She gasped as another pain hit. Zeke half carried her inside, settling her on the bed. His hands were gentle but efficient as he helped her out of her heavy outer clothes. "How far along?" 2 months, maybe 3. The pain was building now, familiar in the worst way. "Zeke, I'm losing it." "Maybe not. Sometimes there's pain without—" But they both knew. Clara had been through this before. After her first husband died, before Thomas. The grinding pain. The inevitable ending. She curled on her side, tears streaming down her face, mourning a child she hadn't even known she carried. Zeke didn't leave her side. He held her through the worst of it, cleaned her up with gentle hands, brought her water and whiskey for the pain. When it was over, when the tiny life had passed from her body, he wrapped her in blankets and held her while she sobbed. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his chest. "I didn't even know, but I'm sorry." "Nothing to be sorry for." His voice was rough. "These things happen. No fault of yours. Everything I touch dies. My babies, Thomas, everyone I love." "Stop." He gripped her shoulders, making her look at him. "You don't get to take credit for the world's cruelty. You loved them, that's all. Loving something doesn't kill it. Doesn't save it either." "No," he agreed quietly. "But it makes the time you have worth something. Your boy, he knew love, this little one. It was made from love. That matters." They grieved together that night, for the child that would never be and all the children they'd already lost. By morning, Clara felt hollowed out but strangely cleansed, as if some last barrier between them had fallen. "Could have been from before," she said as they lay watching dawn break. "From the hard times before I came here." "Does it matter?" She thought about it. "No, either way, it's gone. We could try again." Zeke said carefully, "When you're healed, if you want." Clara turned to study his face. "You'd want that, a child?" "With you, yes. Simple, direct, like everything about him. Would be good to have something in this world besides ghosts. It might happen again. The losing. Might not. Can't live afraid of might." She kissed him, tasting promise and hope despite everything. "All right. When I'm healed, we'll try." They didn't speak of marriage. What would be the point? Out here where no preacher came and no law reached, they were bound by something stronger than words spoken over a book. They were bound by shared loss and found love, by bodies that knew each other's secrets and hearts that understood each other's darkness. The days warmed slowly. Ice began to drip from the eaves, and the snow settled and compacted. "Soon," Zeke said, "the passes would be clear. Soon, the world would remember they existed." One afternoon, as Clara was checking her trap lines, Zeke had taught her his roots, insisting she know everything about survival here. She heard horses. Her heart jumped to her throat as she recognized the danger. Visitors meant questions, meant judgment, meant the outside world intruding on their hard-won peace. She ran back to the cabin, bursting through the door. "Riders coming. 3, maybe 4. Zeke was already reaching for his rifle, his face grim. "How far?" 10 minutes, maybe less. Get the other guns. Load them all." He was moving with the efficient speed she remembered from the wolf attack. "Whatever happens, you stay inside unless I call for you." "Zeke," he caught her face in his hands, kissed her hard. "Trust me, stay inside." She did as he said, loading weapons with steady hands despite her racing heart. Through the window, she watched him step onto the porch, rifle held casual but ready. The picture of a man defending his territory. The riders came into view, 4 men, heavily armed, wearing the kind of clothes that spoke of town living rather than mountain survival. Clara's blood ran cold as she recognized one of them, Samuel Henderson, the banker's son from Copper Creek. "Afternoon," Zeke called out, his voice carrying clear in the still air. "Afternoon yourself," Henderson replied. reining in his horse just outside comfortable shooting range. Smart man. We're looking for someone. Woman named Clara Whitmore. Heard she might have passed this way. Lots of people pass this way, Zeke said evenly. Don't make it my business to remember them all. Henderson smiled. But it was an ugly thing. This one you'd remember. Pretty thing, despite her reputation. Dark hair, gray eyes. Got a way of corrupting decent men. Clara's hands tightened on the rifle she held. Through the window, she could see Zeke's shoulders tense. What she wanted for, Zeke asked. Theft, for one. Took things from the town when she left. Also questions about her boy's death. Some folks think maybe it wasn't the fever that took him. Rage flooded Clara's veins. They were accusing her of killing Thomas? Her boy, her heart, her reason for living. That's a heavy accusation, Zeke said, his voice dangerously quiet. Well, woman like that, who knows what she's capable of? Henderson leaned forward in his saddle. There's a reward, if you've seen her. $100. Not interested? $200 then. Come on, man. What's some used-up whore to you? The shot was so sudden, Clara almost screamed. Henderson's hat flew off his head. A neat hole punched through the crown. The horses danced nervously as their riders fought to control them. Next one goes lower, Zeke said calmly. Now get off my land. Henderson's face was purple with rage, but he wasn't stupid. 4 men or not. Zeke had the defensive position and had just proved his marksmanship. This isn't over, he snarled. We know she's here. We'll be back with more men. With the law. You do that, Zeke said. But you better bring proof of those accusations. And you better be prepared for what you'll find. Man's got a right to defend his property. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Henderson wheeled his horse around. Let's go. We'll be back. Zeke stood on the porch until they were out of sight. Only then did Clara see the slight tremor in his hands as he lowered the rifle. She met him at the door, pulling him inside. They'll come back? Yes. With more men. Probably. Zeke, I should go. This is my trouble, not yours. He set the rifle aside and pulled her against him. Our trouble now. You're not going anywhere. But, no. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. We knew this was coming. World doesn't leave people like us alone forever, but I'll be damned if I let them take you. We'll face whatever comes. Together. Clara buried her face in his chest, breathing in his familiar scent. I love you, she whispered. The first time she'd said it aloud. His arms tightened around her. And I love you. God help us both, but I do. They prepared through the night, barricading windows, setting up defensive positions. If Henderson came back with a posse, they'd make them pay for every inch of ground. But as dawn broke clear and cold, Clara knew this was just the beginning. Their winter idyll was over. Spring had come, and with it, all the ugliness they'd managed to keep at bay. Still, as she stood beside Zeke, watching the sun rise over the mountains, she felt no regret. They'd found each other against all odds, built something real from the ashes of their losses. Whatever came next, they'd face it as they'd faced everything else. Together. No going back now, Zeke said quietly. Would you, if you could? He looked down at her, and his smile was answer enough. Not for anything in this world. The sun climbed higher, painting the snow gold and pink. Somewhere in the distance, Clara thought she heard horses, but for now, for this moment, they were still free, still together. Still alive, it would have to be enough. They came at dawn 5 days later, not just Henderson and his hired guns, but a proper posse. Clara counted at least 12 men through the window, including Sheriff Watson from Copper Creek and, to her dismay, Reverend Mills. The presence of law and church gave their persecution a veneer of respectability that made her stomach turn. Stay back from the windows, Zeke instructed, checking his rifle one more time. They'd prepared as best they could, but 13 against 2 were poor odds, even with defensive advantage. Ezekiel Hartwell. Sheriff Watson's voice boomed across the morning air. This is the law. We need to speak with you about harboring a fugitive. Zeke stepped onto the porch, rifle cradled in his arms. Clara watched from inside, her own weapon ready, heart hammering against her ribs. "Sheriff," Zeke acknowledged, "bit far from your jurisdiction. Aren't you?" "Justice doesn't stop at town borders," Watson replied. "We have a warrant for Clara Whitmore's arrest. Theft and suspicion of murder." "Murder?" Zeke's voice remained steady, but Clara saw his knuckles whiten on the rifle stock. Reverend Mills urged his horse forward. "The woman's child died under mysterious circumstances. Some say she poisoned him rather than see him raised in shame." The accusation hit Clara like a physical blow. She bit her knuckle to keep from crying out, "Tasting blood. Thomas, her sweet boy." "And they dared suggest—" "That's a damn lie," Zeke said flatly. "And you're a fool for repeating it, Reverend." "Watch your tongue, hermit," Henderson snarled. "We know she's here. Hand her over peaceful-like, and we'll leave you be. And if I don't?" Sheriff Watson shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Then we'll have to take her by force. And you'll hang for interfering with the law." "What law?" Zeke's voice rose. "The law that says a woman can be run out of town for the crime of survival? The law that lets you make up charges when the real crime is she wouldn't bow and scrape to your sensibilities? She lived with savages." Someone in the posse shouted, "Bore their spawn. She's unnatural." Zeke's rifle swung toward the speaker. "Say that word again. I dare you." The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara made a decision. Before Zeke could stop her, she stepped out onto the porch beside him. "I'm here," she called out, her voice clear despite her fear. "But I've stolen nothing, and anyone who says I harmed my boy is a liar and a coward." The posse stirred uneasily. Whatever they'd expected, it wasn't this. A woman standing proud beside her man, meeting their accusations head-on. "Clara Whitmore," Sheriff Watson said formally. "You're under arrest. Come peaceful and—" "No." Zeke stepped partially in front of her. "You want her. You go through me. And me." The new voice made everyone turn. From the tree line emerged a figure Clara hadn't seen in over a year, Joseph Standing Bear, the brother of the Cheyenne man she'd lived with. Behind him were 6 more native men, all armed, all watching the posse with cold eyes. "Joseph," Clara breathed. He nodded to her, then addressed the sheriff. "This woman lived among my people with honor. She was a good mother to my brother's child, and to her own son. Anyone who says otherwise speaks lies." The posse was clearly unnerved by this development. They'd expected to intimidate one man and a woman. They hadn't counted on reinforcements, especially not Indian reinforcements. "This is white man's business," Henderson blustered. "No concern of yours." Joseph smiled, but it was all teeth. "When you threaten my brother's woman, it becomes my concern. She ain't his woman anymore." Someone protested. "She's living with this hermit now, and that is her choice." Joseph replied, "As it was her choice to live with us when your people cast her out for the crime of being a widow. We do not forget kindness, and we do not abandon family." Reverend Mills pushed forward, his face red with righteous anger. "This is exactly the problem. Consorting with heathens, living in sin." His words cut off as Zeke's rifle centered on his chest. "Reverend, I've been patient on account of your collar, but my patience is wearing thin. You want to talk about sin? Let's talk about a town that would let a child die because they didn't approve of his mother. Let's talk about good Christian folk who'd turn a widow out in winter to starve or freeze. We gave her every chance to live decent." Mrs. Henderson had arrived with the posse, riding in a buggy. Decent by whose standards? Clara found her voice, stepping around Zeke despite his attempt to stop her. "I worked honest. I kept house, took in washing, did everything proper. But that wasn't enough, was it? Because I'd committed the unforgivable sin of surviving when you'd have preferred I died with my husband. You took up with savages." "Mrs. Henderson shrieked. "I took up with people who showed me kindness." Clara shot back. "Who fed me when I was starving? Who gave me shelter when I had none? If that makes me a sinner, then I'll take my chances with God's judgment over yours." Enough of this. Sheriff Watson seemed to realize the situation was spiraling out of control. Mrs. Whitmore, I have a legal warrant, based on lies. Zeke interrupted. You have any proof of these thefts? Any witnesses to this supposed murder besides gossip and spite? The sheriff's jaw tightened. She was seen leaving town with items. My own belongings, Clara said. My clothes, my son's toys, things that were mine by right, unless poverty is now a crime. And the boy? Reverend Mills demanded. You were the only one with him when he died. The pain of the accusation nearly drove Clara to her knees, but Zeke's steady presence beside her kept her upright. He died of lung fever. Half the children in town had it, but they had doctors who would tend them. Mine was refused help because of who his mother was. Dr. Matthews said, Henderson began. Dr. Matthews refused to treat a dying child. Joseph Standing Bear interrupted. This we also know. My people offered our medicine man, but she feared to bring more anger on herself by accepting, so she watched her child die, unable to help. And now you accuse her of causing what your own cruelty brought about? The posse shifted uneasily. The narrative they'd built, of a depraved woman capable of anything, was clashing with the reality before them. It was then that Zeke played his trump card. Sheriff, I believe you know Colonel Morrison at Fort Laramie? Watson frowned. I do. What of it? Wire him. Ask about Sergeant Ezekiel Hartwell's service record. Ask about the commendations, the Medal of Honor for saving a wagon train from hostile attack. Then ask yourself if a decorated soldier is likely to harbor a murderess. Clara looked at him in surprise. He'd never mentioned medals or commendations. And while you're at it, Zeke continued, ask about the incident at Sand Creek. Ask why Sergeant Hartwell was shot by his own commanding officer for trying to stop the massacre of women and children. Then come talk to me about morality and law. The silence stretched long. Finally, Sheriff Watson holstered his weapon. I'll need to verify. Tom, this is ridiculous, Henderson exploded. We came here to get that woman. We came here to uphold the law, Watson corrected. And the law requires evidence, not just accusations. He looked at Clara. Ma'am, I'll need you to stay where I can find you while I investigate these claims. She'll be right here. Zeke said firmly. This ain't over, Henderson snarled. You can't protect her forever, hermit. And you Indians, you're on dangerous ground interfering in white folks' business. Joseph's smile was cold. We've been on dangerous ground since you arrived. Nothing new there. The standoff might have continued, but Mrs. Henderson chose that moment to speak up. And what about propriety? They're living in sin, bold as brass. Clara felt Zeke tense beside her. Before he could speak, she touched his arm. Mrs. Henderson, when your husband's bank foreclosed on the widow Johnson's farm last winter, where was your concern for propriety? When you ladies of the church decided my son didn't deserve Christian charity because of my choices, where was your morality then? She stepped forward, and several of the posse instinctively backed their horses up. You want to talk about sin? Let's talk about hearts so cold they could turn away a sick child. Let's talk about the pride that lets you sit in judgment while people suffer. I may not be what you consider respectable, but I've never turned away anyone in need. Can you say the same? How dare you? I dare because I've got nothing left to lose. Clara said, You already took everything, my reputation, my place in society, my son's chance at a normal life. What more can you do to me? We can see you hang, Henderson threatened. Try it. Zeke's voice was death cold. But you better bring more than 13 men. You better bring an army, because I'll stack bodies like cordwood before I let you touch her. And you'll have to go through us as well. Joseph added, My people have long memories. Clara Whitmore is under our protection. Sheriff Watson had seen enough. Everyone calm down. We're leaving. But this matter isn't settled. I'll be investigating these accusations proper-like. If I find evidence of wrongdoing, I'll be back. If not, he looked meaningfully at Henderson. Then folks better be prepared to answer for false accusations. He turned his horse. Let's go, now. The posse reluctantly followed, though Henderson and several others threw dark looks back. Only Mrs. Henderson lingered, her face twisted with fury. "This isn't Christian," she called out. "It isn't decent." "No," Clara agreed quietly. "It's human, something you might try sometime." As the posse disappeared down the trail, Clara's knees finally gave out. Zeke caught her, holding her against him as the reaction set in. Joseph and his men approached slowly, respectfully. "Thank you," Clara managed. "I didn't expect. Family is family." Joseph said simply, "My brother loved you. His spirit would give me no peace if I let harm come to you." He studied Zeke with dark, knowing eyes. "You're a warrior. I see it in how you stand, how you hold your weapon. You'll protect her." "With my life," Zeke answered without hesitation. Joseph nodded. "Then she's chosen well." He looked at Clara. "The child you carried, my brother's child. We mourned with you. Now you mourn another. I'm sorry for your losses." "How did you know?" "We've watched, made sure you were well. This is our way." He gestured to his men. "We'll camp nearby for a time. If they come back, we'll handle it together." Zeke finished. After the Cheyenne melted back into the forest, Zeke led Clara inside. She was shaking now, the morning's confrontation hitting her fully. "They'll be back," she said. "Maybe, maybe not. Sheriff Watson's no fool. He knows those charges won't hold." He tipped her chin up. "Medal of Honor?" Zeke shrugged, uncomfortable. "Doesn't mean much, not compared to what came after." "It means something. It means you're the man I thought you were." She kissed him softly. "Thank you for standing with me, for being willing to fight for me." "Clara," he cupped her face in his hands. "I'd burn the whole world down before I'd let them take you. You know that, don't you?" "I know." And she did, just as she knew she'd do the same for him. They spent the rest of the day in tense watchfulness, but no one returned. That night, as they lay together, Clara said, "We can't keep living like this, looking over our shoulders, waiting for the next attack." "No," Zeke agreed. "We can't. So what do we do?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "We make it legal, official, marriage certificate, the whole thing. Harder to attack a man's legal wife than his—" He trailed off. "Your what?" Clara prompted, amused despite everything. "My everything," he finished quietly. "You're my everything." "Clara." She pressed her face into his neck, breathing him in. "When?" "Soon as we can find a preacher who'll do it. Might have to ride to the fort. Military chaplain won't care about your past. And then we build something. Together. Let them come if they dare. We'll be ready." Clara thought about it. A real marriage. A legal bond to go with the emotional one they'd already forged. It wouldn't solve everything, wouldn't erase her past or the town's hatred. But it would be something. A declaration. A choice. "Yes," she said. "Let's do it." Zeke rolled her beneath him, kissing her deeply. "Mrs. Hartwell," he murmured against her lips. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Clara admitted. "So do I." Outside, she could hear the normal sounds of night, wind in the pines, an owl calling, the distant howl of wolves. But also, if she listened carefully, the soft sounds of horses and men, Joseph and his warriors, keeping watch, family in all its forms, protecting their own. They'd won this battle. But the war wasn't over. The town wouldn't give up easily. Wouldn't accept that someone they deemed unworthy had found happiness despite their judgment. But Clara found she didn't care. Let them come. She had Zeke. She had unexpected allies, and she had the strength born of surviving everything they'd already thrown at her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, safe in the arms of the man she loved. Clara allowed herself to hope. They'd build something good here, she and Zeke, something worth fighting for. And fight they would, if necessary. Together. The attack came in the dead of night, a week after the confrontation. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and Zeke shaking her roughly. "Fire! Get up! Get dressed! Now!" Through the window, She could see orange flames licking at the barn. The horses were screaming, and she could hear men's voices shouting orders. This wasn't random. This was planned. Clara threw on clothes, grabbing the rifle beside the bed. How many? Can't tell. At least 6, maybe more. Zeke was already moving, checking weapons. They're trying to smoke us out. A window shattered in the main room, followed by another. Burning torches sailed through, spreading fire across the floor. Clara grabbed blankets, trying to smother the flames while Zeke took position at a window. There! He fired, and someone cried out in the darkness. Return fire peppered the cabin walls. The roof! Clara pointed to where flames were already spreading across the wooden shingles. The cabin would be an inferno within minutes. We have to get out. Zeke's face was grim. They'll be watching the doors. The root cellar, Clara said. The tunnel. Months ago, Zeke had shown her the escape tunnel he'd dug from the root cellar, leading to the tree line. Paranoid mountain man habits, he'd called it then. Now it might save their lives. They fought their way through thickening smoke to the cellar entrance. Behind them, the cabin groaned as fire consumed the walls. Everything they'd built together, going up in flames. Move! Zeke pushed her down the ladder, following close behind. The cellar was already filling with smoke. They crawled through the narrow tunnel, dirt raining down as the cabin's structure weakened above them. They emerged in the trees just as the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. By the firelight, Clara could see armed men circling the burning cabin, waiting for them to flee. Murderers, one called out. Come out and face justice. Clara recognized Henderson's voice, slurred with drink. This wasn't about justice. This was about revenge and wounded pride. Zeke touched her shoulder, pointed deeper into the woods. They moved silently, using skills he'd taught her over the winter months, behind them. Shouts of frustration rose as the attackers realized their prey had escaped. Check the woods. They can't have gone far. Gunfire erupted, wild shots into the darkness. Clara pressed close to a tree, heart hammering. They were outnumbered, outgunned, with nowhere to go except deeper into the wilderness. Then, like ghosts, Joseph Standing Bear and his warriors materialized from the shadows. Silent hand signals passed between them and Zeke. Clara found herself being guided through the forest by sure hands, away from the searchers. They didn't stop until dawn revealed their position, a hidden valley miles from the cabin, where the Cheyenne had made camp. Clara collapsed by the fire, exhausted and heartsick. Everything was gone. Her few possessions, Zeke's books, the home they'd made together. I'm sorry, she whispered to Zeke. This is my fault. They came because of me. They came because they're cowards and fools. Zeke corrected harshly. This isn't on you. Joseph approached, his face grave. The men who did this, they'll claim you attacked them. Say you're fugitives now, to be shot on sight. Let them come. Zeke growled. No. Clara straightened, decision crystallizing. No more running, no more hiding. She looked at Joseph. Can you get word to Fort Laramie, to the colonel Zeke mentioned? Joseph nodded slowly. It can be done. Then do it. Tell him Sergeant Hartwell needs help. Tell him. She glanced at Zeke. Tell him there are men trying to murder a Medal of Honor recipient and his wife. We're not married yet, Zeke pointed out. We are in every way that matters, Clara said firmly. And we will be legally, as soon as possible. 3 days later, as Clara helped the Cheyenne women prepare a meal, a cavalry unit rode into the valley. At its head was a grizzled officer who swung down from his horse and strode directly to Zeke. Sergeant Hartwell, been a while. Colonel Morrison. Zeke saluted, old habits returning. Thank you for coming. When Standing Bear's message reached me, I'll admit I was surprised. Ezekiel Hartwell, the man who told me and the entire U.S. Army to go to hell. Asking for help? It's not for me. It's for her. I figured as much. Morrison turned to Clara, touching his hat. Ma'am, I understand you've had some trouble with the fine folks of Copper Creek. Clara lifted her chin. They burned us out. Colonel, Tried to murder us in our beds because they don't approve of my past." Morrison's weathered face hardened. "That's so. Well, burning out civilians, attacking veterans, sounds like lawlessness to me. Lucky thing I happen to have a full company with me, doing patrol sweeps." He grinned wolfishly. "Seems we might need to pay Copper Creek a visit, restore some order." The trip back to the destroyed cabin was surreal. Clara rode between Zeke and Colonel Morrison, surrounded by blue uniforms. Behind them, Joseph and several of his warriors followed. They'd insisted on seeing this through. At the cabin site, Morrison surveyed the still smoldering ruins with professional interest. Definitely arson. See the pour patterns? They used coal oil. He turned to his lieutenant. "Make note of that for the report." "Colonel," Zeke said quietly, "I appreciate this, but you should know. Clara's past. What they're saying. I know all about it." Morrison interrupted. Standing Bear was quite thorough. Woman survived by taking shelter with the Cheyenne after being widowed. Had a child that died. Later lost another child to fever while living in a town that denied her boy medical care. He spat in the dirt. "Sounds to me like she's got more strength than the whole town combined." They rode into Copper Creek like an invasion force. The townspeople scattered before them, shopkeepers peering fearfully from behind curtained windows. Morrison led them straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Watson emerged, paling at the sight of the cavalry. "Colonel Morrison, this is unexpected." "Sheriff." Morrison didn't dismount. "I understand you've had some trouble maintaining order in your town. Arson, attempted murder, harassment of civilians. Seems like you need some help." "Yeah, now, see here. I am seeing, Sheriff, I'm seeing a town that thinks it can burn out anyone it doesn't like, attack war veterans, make false accusations to justify murder." Morrison's voice carried clearly down the main street. "That ends now." Henderson appeared from the bank, his father beside him. "This is town business. You have no authority." "Martial law gives me all the authority I need," Morrison said calmly, "which I'm declaring as of now, given the clear breakdown of civil order." He smiled coldly. "Any objections can be filed with General Sheridan. I'm sure he'll be fascinated to hear how civilians are attacking Medal of Honor recipients." "She's a whore, Mrs." Henderson shrieked from the crowd that was gathering. "She lived with savages." Morrison's gaze found her. "Ma'am, I'd be very careful about throwing stones. I have here a full report on your husband's bank. Seems there are questions about several foreclosures, missing funds, loans called in illegally. Federal investigators would be very interested." The blood drained from Banker Henderson's face. "You can't prove—" "Can't I?" Morrison produced a sheaf of papers. "Amazing what people will tell federal authorities when properly motivated, like how you foreclosed on Widow Johnson after her husband died, giving her only 2 days to vacate, or how you've been charging interest rates that violate federal usury laws." The crowd was murmuring now. Old grievances finding voice. Morrison raised his voice. "Here's what's going to happen. First, anyone involved in the attack on the Hartwell cabin will turn themselves in. They'll be tried by military tribunal for attempted murder of a veteran. Hartwell cabin, someone called. They ain't married. They are now." Morrison gestured, and the chaplain rode forward. "Married them myself an hour ago, with full military witnesses. Anyone has a problem with that?" Silence greeted this announcement. Clara felt Zeke's hand find hers, squeezing gently. Married? It had been a simple ceremony by the burned cabin, with cavalry soldiers and Cheyenne warriors as witnesses. Not what she'd imagined, but perfect in its way. "Second," Morrison continued, "the town will pay restitution for the destroyed property and attempted murder. $5,000 should cover it." "5,000!" Henderson exploded. "That's robbery. That's justice, unless you'd prefer federal investigation of the bank?" Morrison waited. "No? Good. Third, anyone who harasses or threatens the Hartwells again will answer to me personally. And trust me, you don't want that." Reverend Mills pushed forward. "This is moral outrage. You can't force us to accept—" "Reverend?" Morrison's voice cut like a blade. I was at Sand Creek. I know exactly what moral outrage looks like. And it isn't a woman finding shelter where she can... It's people like you, so sure of their righteousness they can justify any cruelty. The Reverend retreated, face flushed. Morrison surveyed the crowd one more time. The Hartwells will rebuild. Anyone interferes, they'll answer to military justice. Are we clear? Sullen agreement met his words. Morrison nodded to his men, who began dismounting. We'll be staying a few days, just to ensure order is maintained. Sheriff Watson, I'll need to review your recent arrest records. Make sure all these investigations are legitimate. As the crowd dispersed, Clara heard muttered curses and threats, but no one dared act with the soldiers present. Henderson and his crew had melted away, probably to drink and plot in private. This won't last, Clara said quietly to Zeke. Soon as the soldiers leave, then we make sure they remember the lesson. Morrison overheard. Sergeant Hartwell, I'm reinstating your commission. Technically, attacking you is attacking active military. That protection extends to your wife. Zeke stiffened. Colonel, I left the Army. Reserve commission. You don't have to serve, but the protection remains. Morrison's eyes were kind. You saved my life once. Hartwell, that wagon train you defended? My wife was on it, my daughter. I owe you more than I can repay. They stayed in town 3 days, long enough to collect the restitution money and order supplies for rebuilding. The townspeople avoided them, but Clara caught glimpses of something else in some faces. Shame, perhaps, or recognition that the town's moral certainty had been built on sand. Misses. Henderson confronted Clara one last time outside the general store. You think you've won? You're still nothing but a survivor. Clara interrupted calmly. A woman who chose life over your narrow ideas of propriety. And now, a woman with a husband who loves her and the protection of the United States Army. She stepped closer. Your move, Mrs. Henderson. The older woman's face contorted, but she said nothing more. As Clara walked away, she heard Zeke's quiet chuckle. Remind me never to cross you, Mrs. Hartwell. See that you don't, Mr. Hartwell. They rode back to their land with a full escort and wagon loads of supplies. Joseph and his people met them there, having guarded the site in their absence. Together, they began the work of rebuilding, not just a cabin this time, but a proper house. Soldiers and warriors worked side by side, raising walls that would be stronger than before. It won't be the same, Clara said that night, looking at the new structure taking shape. No, Zeke agreed, pulling her close. It'll be better. We're not hiding anymore. Clara, we're building something that says we belong here, that we're not going anywhere. Colonel Morrison found them there. I'll leave a small detail for a month, just to discourage any foolishness. But Hartwell, he looked serious. This won't end all the prejudice. You know that. We know, Zeke said. But we're through running. This is our home, Morrison nodded. Standing Bear says his people will help watch. Seems you've got family in unexpected places. He touched his hat to Clara. Ma'am, it's been an honor. Any woman who could bring Ezekiel Hartwell back to the living is someone special indeed. After he left, Clara asked, What did he mean? Back to the living? Zeke was quiet for a long moment. After May died, after I mustered out, I came here to die slowly. Couldn't put a gun to my head, but I figured the mountains would do it eventually. Then you showed up, half frozen and fully stubborn, and suddenly I had a reason to wake up in the morning. Just to make me coffee? To make you coffee. To hear you humming while you work. To argue with you about who checks the trap lines. To hold you at night and know I'm not alone anymore. He kissed her temple. To love you. Clara Hartwell. That's worth more than all the medals they could give me. They worked through the afternoon, and by evening had the walls fully raised. As the sun set, Clara stood in what would be their new bedroom, looking out at the mountains. No regrets? Zeke asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back into his warmth. None. They tried to break us and failed. We're still here, still together. That's victory enough for me. The town won't forget. They'll always see you as the woman who lived with Indians, me as the man who chose you over them. Let them, Clara said fiercely. We know who we are. That's what matters. As darkness fell, they made camp in the half-finished house. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges. The town's hatred hadn't disappeared. It had only been driven underground by superior force. But Clara had learned something important. They weren't alone. They had each other. They had unexpected allies. And they had the strength that came from facing the worst and surviving. She'd lost her first family, her place in society, almost her life. But she'd gained something stronger, a love forged in adversity, a home built on truth rather than pretense, and the knowledge that she could survive anything as long as Zeke stood beside her. The stars came out, brilliant in the clear mountain air. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled, not threatening now, but almost welcoming, wild creatures recognizing their own kind. I love you, she told Zeke as they bedded down in their temporary shelter. And I love you, he replied. Today, tomorrow, always. Clara smiled in the darkness. Let the town talk. Let them hate. She had everything she needed right here, love, purpose, and the promise of a future built on their own terms. The widow they'd tried to destroy had become something stronger. A wife, a fighter, a survivor, and she was just getting started. The first snow of their new beginning fell on a quiet December morning, almost 2 years after the fire. Clara stood on the porch of their rebuilt home, stronger now, larger, with stone foundations that spoke of permanence. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the child move within. You'll catch cold, Zeke said, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. His hands lingered, protective and gentle. I wanted to see the snow. Clara said, Remember? It was snowing when I first came here, half dead and stubborn as a mule. Zeke recalled, his arms coming around her. Best thing that ever happened to me? They'd rebuilt more than just their home. The small ranch now boasted a proper barn, smokehouse, and even a second cabin, currently occupied by Marcus and Ruth Hawkins, a young Negro couple who'd arrived 6 months ago, fleeing troubles of their own. Zeke had hired Marcus to help with the expanding operation, and Ruth had become Clara's closest companion. Mrs. Clara, Ruth called from across the yard. You got a visitor coming. Clara squinted through the falling snow, making out a single rider. Her hand instinctively moved to the rifle just inside the door. Old habits died hard, but Zeke was already moving to intercept. The rider was a woman, bundled against the cold. When she pushed back her hood, Clara gasped. It was Elizabeth Morrison, the colonel's wife, Mrs. Hartwell, she said, dismounting stiffly. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Clara said, though her mind raced. What would bring the colonel's wife here, alone, in such weather? Inside, over hot coffee and Clara's fresh bread. Elizabeth Morrison revealed her purpose. I've heard about what you've built here, a place where people can start over, regardless of their past. We don't turn away folks who need help, Clara said carefully. Elizabeth's composed facade cracked slightly. My daughter Sarah, she's in trouble. She fell in love with a sergeant, a good man, but... She paused. But he's part Cherokee. They married in secret, but when my husband found out, tears threatened. He had the marriage annulled, had Sergeant Rivers transferred to the territories. But Sarah, she's with child, the scandal, if it becomes known. Clara exchanged glances with Zeke. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The colonel who'd helped them was now facing his own test of principles. Where is she now? Clara asked gently. At the fort, hidden in my quarters. But she can't stay. People are beginning to talk. Elizabeth leaned forward. Could she stay here? Until she decides what to do? Of course, Clara said without hesitation. She'll be safe here. Sarah Morrison arrived 3 nights later, accompanied by Ruth's husband, Marcus, who'd gone to fetch her. She was young, barely 18, with her mother's delicate features but her father's stubborn chin, and very obviously pregnant. I won't apologize, were her first words to Clara. I love James. What we have is real, whatever my father says. No apology needed. Clara assured her, love doesn't ask permission. Sarah stayed through the winter, helping with household tasks, learning from Clara and Ruth about surviving in the mountains. She was a quick study, eager to prove she could contribute. And slowly, as her belly grew with her child, she began to smile again. The test came in March. Colonel Morrison himself arrived, flanked by a small detail of soldiers. Clara met him on the porch, aware of Zeke standing armed and ready behind her. Mrs. Hartwell, Morrison said formally, I believe you have something of mine. Your daughter is a grown woman, not property. Clara replied evenly, she's here of her own free will. Morrison's face was stone. She's my daughter, barely more than a child herself. Old enough to love, old enough to choose. Clara stepped aside. But you should speak to her yourself. Sarah emerged then, chin high despite her obvious condition. Father? For a moment, Morrison's stern facade wavered. Sarah, come home. We can handle this quietly. Send you to your aunt in Boston until I give birth to your grandchild in shame and secrecy. Sarah's voice was steady. No, Father, I won't hide anymore. That man, he's gone. Sarah, transferred. He won't be back. Then I'll wait for him. Or go to him. Once the baby's born. Sarah moved to stand beside Clara. These people took me in without judgment. They've shown me more true Christian charity than all the proper folks who would see me ruined. Morrison's gaze moved between his daughter and Clara. You did this, filled her head with your radical ideas. She gave me courage. Sarah interrupted. Showed me that surviving outside society's approval is possible, that love matters more than reputation. Sarah, please. Elizabeth Morrison had dismounted, approaching her daughter with outstretched hands. Think of your future. No decent man will have you if... Then I don't want a decent man, Sarah said firmly. I want James, and if I can't have him, I'll raise our child alone, like Clara did before she found Zeke. The standoff stretched taut. Then Zeke spoke from the doorway. Colonel, you helped us when we needed it. Stood up for what was right, even when it wasn't popular. Your daughter's asking for the same thing. Morrison's jaw worked. This is different. She's my daughter. And Clara is someone's daughter too. Zeke continued. Every woman you and your society condemn for choosing love over propriety. They're all someone's daughter, sister, mother. When does their humanity matter? James is a good man, Sarah added quietly. He saved 3 men in a skirmish last year. Was promoted for bravery. His only crime is having a Cherokee grandmother. Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then, shoulders sagging, he said, I know he's a good man. That's what makes this harder. He looked at his daughter. If you do this, society will never accept you. You'll be ostracized, whispered about, like Clara was, like Ruth and Marcus are. Sarah gestured to the thriving homestead around them. Seems to me they're doing just fine without society's approval. Elizabeth stepped forward then, tears streaming. Sarah, my darling girl. Sarah embraced her mother, both women crying. Over her daughter's shoulder, Elizabeth met Clara's eyes. Thank you, she mouthed silently. When they separated, Morrison cleared his throat roughly. Sergeant Rivers is stationed at Fort Robinson. If someone were to write to him about Sarah's condition, Sarah's face lit up with hope. Father? I can't openly support this, Morrison said carefully. But I won't stand in your way either. And perhaps it's time the Army reconsidered some of its policies about mixed marriages. He turned to Clara. You've made an enemy of me into... I don't know what we are now. Human beings trying to do right by those we love, Clara suggested. That's all any of us are. Colonel? Morrison nodded slowly, then remounted. Take care of her, he said gruffly. Both of you, and Sarah. Write to Sergeant Rivers. I'll ensure the letter gets through. After they left, Sarah collapsed into Clara's arms, sobbing with relief. He didn't disown me. I was so sure. Parents can surprise you, Clara said, thinking of her own long-dead father, who died before seeing what she'd become. Love is stronger than prejudice, given time. Spring arrived with Sarah's labor. Clara and Ruth attended her, Zeke pacing outside like an expectant father himself. The birth was long but uncomplicated, and as dawn broke, Sarah's son announced himself with lusty cries. "He's beautiful," Clara said, placing the baby in Sarah's arms. "What will you name him?" "Thomas," Sarah said softly. "After your boy, would that be all right?" Clara's eyes filled. It would be an honor. 2 weeks later, another rider approached, this time in uniform. Sergeant James Rivers swung down from his horse, his mixed heritage evident in his features, but his bearing purely military. "Sarah!" He took the porch steps 3 at a time, then stopped, suddenly uncertain. "I got the colonel's letter. I came as fast as—" Sarah appeared in the doorway, baby Thomas in her arms. "James?" Clara and Zeke retreated, giving the young family privacy for their reunion. Through the window, they watched James drop to his knees before Sarah, touching his son's face with wondering fingers. "Think they'll make it?" Zeke asked. "They've got a chance," Clara said. "That's more than most get." The wedding took place a month later. In the meadow behind the house, Colonel Morrison himself performed the ceremony, having used his influence to ensure it would be legally recognized. The guests were an odd mix. Soldiers, Cheyenne warriors, Joseph Standing Bear served as witness, Marcus and Ruth, even a few townspeople who'd begun to question their old prejudices. "Funny how things turn out," Zeke murmured to Clara as they watched Sarah and James dance. "The colonel who saved us needed saving himself. We all need saving sometimes." Clara replied, her hand moving to her belly where their own child grew. "Question is whether we're brave enough to accept it." As summer deepened, their small community expanded. Word had somehow spread, perhaps through Ruth's letters to friends, perhaps through soldiers' tales, that there was a place in the mountains where the past mattered less than the present, where people were judged by their actions rather than their histories. They came in ones and twos. A Chinese woman fleeing a brothel, a Mormon family cast out for questioning doctrine, a mixed-race couple from Texas, others with stories too painful to share immediately. Not all stayed, but those who did contributed to building something unique, a community outside society's boundaries, but rich in its own ways. "We're becoming what they feared," Clara observed one evening, watching their diverse neighbors share supper in the yard. "A place where their rules don't apply." "Good," Zeke said firmly. "Their rules never did anyone much good anyway." Clara's labor came with the first autumn frost. This time, she was the one crying out while Ruth and Sarah attended her. Zeke wore a groove in the porch planks with his pacing, Marcus trying unsuccessfully to distract him with conversation. "It's a girl," Ruth called finally, and Zeke nearly broke the door down getting inside. "A girl," he breathed, touching the baby's tiny fingers. "What should we name her?" Clara, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at him. "Hope," she said, "because that's what she is, what all of this is." As winter approached once more, Clara stood again on the porch, baby Hope in her arms. The settlement had grown. Now 7 cabins dotted the valley, smoke rising from chimneys, children's voices carrying on the wind. It wasn't the life she'd imagined as a young bride. Certainly not what Copper Creek would consider respectable, but it was real. It was theirs, and it was good. Zeke joined her, his arm coming around her waist. "Any regrets?" Clara looked out over their small kingdom, built on love, sustained by courage, populated by fellow survivors. "Not a one," she said. In the distance, she could see riders approaching, new souls seeking sanctuary. Probably, there would be more mouths to feed, more cabins to build, more hearts to heal. But they would manage. They always did, because that's what love does. It builds from ashes, grows in unlikely soil, creates families from strangers and hope from despair. Clara had learned that lesson in the hardest way possible, had paid for it in blood and tears and nearly her life. But standing here now, surrounded by the life they'd built together, she knew every sacrifice had been worth it. She'd been the forsaken widow, cast out and condemned. Now she was Clara Hartwell, wife, mother, and keeper of sanctuary for others society had thrown away. The mountain wind carried the smell of snow and wood smoke, the sounds of life and laughter. Somewhere, a baby cried. Sarah's Thomas or one of the other children who'd found safety here. Soon Hope would add her voice to the chorus, would grow up in a place where love mattered more than law, where family was chosen rather than just born. "Storm coming," Zeke observed, eyeing the darkening sky. "We'll weather it," Clara said confidently. "We always do." And they would. Together. They'd face whatever came, storms and sunshine, joy and sorrow, acceptance and prejudice, because they'd learned the greatest truth of all, that love, real love, could conquer anything, even the judgment of a world that would never understand. In their mountain sanctuary, the forsaken had found forgiveness, the broken had found healing, and the lonely had found home. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying Don't Waste Your Silver, whether you're listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Zeke's journey in the comments below. Your feedback means everything to us.